The radio crackled at 6:47 a.m., which meant someone was dying or about to be. I was replacing the gauze in my aid station, the cheap stuff from McKesson Medical that falls apart if you breathe on it wrong, when dispatch came through asking if I could handle a heat casualty near Phantom Ranch. "Define handle," I said, because Marie always taught me to clarify the scope before committing. She'd been an ER nurse for 15 years before the cancer. 3 months gone now, and I still caught myself turning to ask her opinion about supply orders. Hiker, female, 52, burns, severe. Burns? It's only 98 degrees down there. That's what she said too, right before her boots melted. I stopped organizing supplies. Boots don't melt at 98 degrees. I know that, Ethan. She knows that. Her husband's screaming at me that the rock is glowing. So can you go or not? Could. That was the problem. I was the only medic stationed at the South Rim who'd actually worked in the canyon during a heat wave. 5 years ago, when we lost 2 German tourists who ignored every warning sign and hiked out at midday. Their bodies cooked from the inside. Marie had held my hand that night while I couldn't stop seeing their faces. Yeah, I'm going. The Bright Angel Trail starts pretty. All those tourists taking selfies at the trailhead, wearing their brand new Merrell boots that'll give them blisters by mile 2. But it stops being pretty real fast. 11 miles down to the Colorado River, all switchbacks and exposed sandstone, and the temperature rises about 10 degrees for every 1,000 feet you drop. Except today it wasn't rising steadily. It was spiking. At the 3-mile rest house, my thermometer read 127 degrees. In the shade. That was impossible, even Death Valley rarely hits that, and we were still 3,000 feet above the canyon floor. I checked the thermometer twice, thinking it was broken. The analog backup read the same. The metal on the water fountain was too hot to touch. Not warm. Hot enough that I could smell the paint blistering. Nobody was at the rest house. That should have been my first real warning. It was prime hiking hours, and the place was always packed with people resting, complaining about their knees, asking how much farther to Indian Garden. Just me and air that felt like standing in front of an open oven. I kept going because I'm stubborn and because the woman with melted boots was still down there somewhere. That's what Marie always said about me, that I couldn't leave a problem unsolved even when the smart move was to walk away. She'd been talking about her cancer treatments, about how I kept pushing for one more clinical trial when she just wanted to stop fighting. The math had been clear then too. I'd ignored it anyway. At Indian Garden, I found Becky Hart sitting under the cottonwoods with her feet in the creek. Her hiking boots, expensive Asolos, the kind that cost $300, were half-melted puddles of rubber and synthetic leather beside her. Her feet were burned, 2nd degree at least, the skin peeling away in sheets. Her husband was crouched next to her, and his face, Christ, his face was wrong. One side looked normal. The other side looked like he'd aged 40 years. The skin papery and liver spotted, eye socket sunken deep. "Mr. Hart? I'm Ethan Cole, park medic." I knelt beside them, trying to process what I was seeing. "What happened to your face?" I was shading her from the sun, and then it hurt, like sunburn but instant. "Is it bad?" It was bad. It was impossible. You don't age half your face in an hour from sun exposure. That's not how radiation works, not how skin works, not how anything works. I checked Becky's vitals while trying not to stare at her husband's face. Pulse rapid but steady. Blood pressure elevated. Temperature 104.2, which was concerning but not immediately critical. Her pupils responded normally to light. "The rock started glowing," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she was describing something ordinary. Not red-hot glowing, more like phosphorescent, like it was lit from inside. I stepped on it and my boots just melted. Took maybe 5 seconds. I looked at the rock she was pointing to, Navajo sandstone, about 2 feet across, sitting in full sun where the creek bank leveled out. It looked normal now, reddish-brown, grainy, the same as a million other rocks in the canyon. I held my hand near it. The heat coming off was intense, easily 200 degrees. But the air temperature around it was only, I checked my thermometer, 96 degrees. The rock was generating its own heat, somehow. "We need to evacuate," I said, pulling out my radio. "Both of you now. We'll get you up to." That's when I heard the screaming from down the trail. Not pain screaming, not fear screaming. This was worse. This long, oscillating wail that sounded like it was coming from multiple throats at once, echoing off the canyon walls in a way that made my teeth hurt. "Stay here," I told the hearts, and I ran toward the sound. I found them at Havasupai Gardens, maybe a quarter-mile down. For hikers, two couples, based on their matching sun hats, standing in the middle of the trail. Just standing there, screaming that terrible oscillating scream, their mouths stretched impossibly wide. One of them was bleeding from the eyes, just blood, streaming down his cheeks like tears, but he didn't seem to notice or care. He was staring at something I couldn't see, something down the trail toward Phantom Ranch. Another one's skin was turning gray, actually gray, like concrete, spreading across his arms in patches that looked rough and granular. As I watched, he reached up and scratched his neck, and pieces of his skin flaked off like stone dust. The third was moving wrong, her joints bending at angles that shouldn't work, like her bones had lost their rigidity. She took a step forward and her knee bent backward, but she didn't fall, just kept walking on that backwards bent leg like it was normal. The fourth was aging, fast. Her hair going white in streaks, skin wrinkling, hands developing liver spots even as I watched. She'd been maybe 30 when I'd seen her at the trailhead this morning. Now she looked 70. And they were all still screaming. "Hey!" I shouted. "Can you hear me?" They didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge I existed, just kept screaming and staring down the trail at something I couldn't see, something that was doing this to them. My radio crackled. "All units, this is Incident Command. We're getting reports of anomalous conditions throughout the inner canyon. Temperature spikes, geological disturbances, and static. Then, multiple casualties with unexplained injuries. All personnel are ordered to evacuate immediately." I looked down the trail. According to the trail markers, Phantom Ranch was 2 miles away. There were supposed to be maybe 200 people down there. Campers, hikers, mule riders, the overnight guests staying at the lodge. 200 people, and whatever was happening was coming from that direction. My radio again, different voice, military crisp. "This is Colonel Sarah Vance, U.S. Air Force. Grand Canyon is now under federal emergency protocols. All personnel evacuate to the South Rim. We have reason to believe there is a significant geological event occurring in the canyon depths." Geological event. Such a clean military phrase for whatever was turning people's skin to stone and making rocks glow from the inside. "Colonel, this is Ethan Cole, park medic at Indian Garden. I have multiple casualties with severe anomalous injuries. What kind of geological event are we talking about?" Long pause. Too long. "The kind you don't ask questions about, Mr. Cole. The kind you run from." Behind me, the hearts were screaming too now. That same oscillating wail. I turned and saw them standing by the creek, staring down the trail, Becky's burned feet forgotten, her husband's aged face slack and expressionless. And the cottonwood trees around them were wilting, just dropping their leaves in huge green cascades, the branches turning black and brittle, like they were dying from a decade of drought in the space of minutes. The creek water was getting darker, not muddy thick, like it was becoming syrup or blood or something else entirely. And underneath all of it, the screaming, the wilting, the impossible heat, I could feel something, a vibration in the rock, too low to hear but strong enough to feel in my bones. A rhythm, a pulse. Something was waking up down there, something vast, and we were all standing on top of it. I made my choice, probably the wrong one. Marie would have told me it was the wrong one. I headed down toward Phantom Ranch, where 200 people were about to experience whatever was rising from the canyon depths. The trail to Phantom Ranch should have been 2 miles. I'd hiked it 100 times, knew every switchback, every marker, every spot where tourists stopped to take photos of the river view. Except the trail was getting longer. I'd been walking for 40 minutes when I checked the mile marker. It said 1.8 miles to Phantom Ranch. Same distance as when I'd started. I stopped, checked my GPS watch. The Garmin Phoenix that Marie had bought me for my birthday. Too expensive, but she insisted because you'll use it every day and I'll worry less. The watch said I'd covered 2.3 miles. The trail marker said 1.8. One of them was wrong, or the canyon was. I kept walking, faster now, and the vibration in the rock was getting stronger. Not just a pulse anymore, it was rhythmic, complex, like something breathing. Something huge breathing. Lungs the size of canyon walls expanding and contracting beneath my feet. The temperature was still climbing. 132 degrees according to my thermometer. In the shade. That was Death Valley heat, blast furnace heat. Heat that killed people in minutes if they weren't prepared. But I wasn't sweating. That should have been my second real warning. At 132 degrees, I should have been pouring sweat, losing liters of water, my body desperately trying to cool itself. Instead, my skin was dry, completely dry. The heat wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from below. I passed another hiker going the opposite direction. A kid, maybe 19, wearing a University of Arizona shirt and carrying a camelback that looked empty. He was running up the trail, gasping, his eyes wide with something beyond fear. "Turn around," he said. "Don't go down there. You can't." He stopped, bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. "What's down there?" "I don't know." I looked and He touched his face, and I saw that his fingernails were bleeding at the cuticles, like they were trying to grow too fast, pushing through the nail bed. "Time's wrong down there. I was at Phantom for 10 minutes, but my watch says 6 hours. And I saw." He shook his head violently. "No, I didn't see anything. I couldn't have seen that." "Seen what?" "The canyon's too deep," he said. And then he was running again, stumbling up the trail, leaving bloody nail prints on the rocks where he grabbed for balance. I should have turned around. Any rational person would have turned around. But Marie always said I had a compulsion to understand things, to figure out the mechanism, even when the smart move was to just accept that something was broken and walk away. She'd been right about that too. The trail dropped into a shadowed section where the walls closed in, and suddenly the temperature plunged. Not cooled, plunged. I watched my thermometer drop from 132 to 54 in the space of 30 seconds. My breath came out in visible puffs. 54 degrees. In Arizona. In July. At the bottom of a canyon that should have been a furnace. And the walls were moving. Not physically moving, the rock wasn't shifting or falling. But the texture was changing, rippling like water, the sedimentary layers blending and separating in patterns that hurt to look at. Colors that shouldn't exist in sandstone. Deep purples, sickly greens, blacks that seemed to pull light into them and not let go. I touched the wall, felt normal, solid, rough, warm from the sun. But when I pulled my hand away, the handprint I'd left stayed there, glowing faintly, like I'd pressed into bioluminescent clay. My radio crackled. "Mr. Cole, this is Colonel Vance. We're tracking your position. You need to turn around now. There are 200 people at Phantom Ranch." There were 200 people at Phantom Ranch. Past tense. Satellite imaging shows the lodge is gone. Gone where? Not gone where, Mr. Cole? Gone when? Or gone how? We're not entirely sure. The imaging is inconsistent. I kept walking. The trail opened up again, and I could see the Colorado River ahead, except it wasn't flowing right. Parts of it moved forward, parts backward. Parts just hung suspended in the air like someone had pressed pause on specific sections of water. And beyond the river, where Phantom Ranch should have been, nothing. Not destroyed, not burned or collapsed or washed away. Just nothing. A void in space where the buildings should have been, like someone had cut a chunk out of reality with scissors. I could see through the void to the far canyon wall, but the perspective was wrong. The distances didn't match, and looking at it made my head pound with a migraine that formed instantly. Colonel, Phantom Ranch isn't gone. It's been removed. Surgically removed from space. We know. We've been watching it happen for the past 3 hours. I've been hiking for 45 minutes. Our tracking shows you've been hiking for 6 hours and 17 minutes, Mr. Cole. Time dilation is increasing as you approach the epicenter. 6 hours. The kid with the bleeding nails had said 10 minutes felt like 6 hours. I'd been experiencing the opposite, 6 hours compressed into 45 minutes. The canyon was breaking time in both directions. What's the epicenter, Colonel? What's causing this? Another long pause. I could hear arguing in the background, someone saying something about classification levels and need-to-know basis. We believe something is emerging from approximately 4,000 feet below the canyon floor. Seismic data suggests a cavity system extending down to depths that shouldn't exist. The Vishnu basement rock at the canyon bottom is 1.7 billion years old, Mr. Cole. Whatever's down there is older. Older than 1.7 billion years. Older than most complex life on Earth. Older than continents in their current configuration. And it's waking up. Waking up implies consciousness. We're not prepared to make that determination. But yes, it's becoming active. And everything within a 2-mile radius is being affected by some form of, we're calling it exotic physics. Our best people can't explain it. I looked at the void where Phantom Ranch had been. What happened to the people? We don't know. Some made it out with injuries similar to what you described. Others, she hesitated. We're picking up thermal signatures in impossible locations. Inside solid rock. Suspended 200 feet in the air. One signature appears to be moving backwards through time, if our instruments are reading correctly, which they probably aren't. So what's the plan? The plan is you turn around and evacuate. We're establishing a perimeter at the south rim. In 4 hours, we're going to attempt to neutralize the emerging entity using conventional ordnance. You're going to bomb it. We're going to try. The physics consultants think ordnance delivered during a specific phase of the entity's emergence cycle might disrupt whatever process is occurring. Or it might make things worse. Honestly, we're operating on guesswork here. I should have turned around. The math was clear. Turn around, climb 3 miles, live. Keep going, step into a zone where physics doesn't work, probably die in a way that would be difficult to explain to my next of kin. But between me and the south rim were the hearts. The 4 hikers with the screaming and the aging and the stone skin. That kid with the bleeding nails. And probably a dozen others I hadn't found yet, all of them caught in the expanding radius of whatever was happening. I'm going to get anyone who's still alive out of this radius, I said. Then you can bomb whatever you want. Mr. Cole, you have 4 hours before. I know. For hours. Then you bring the canyon down on whatever this thing is, and anyone still down here goes with it. I'm glad you understand. I understood. I just didn't agree with her math. I started climbing back up the trail, and immediately noticed something was wrong. The mile marker now said 3.2 miles to Indian Garden. When I'd passed it going down, maybe 20 minutes ago, maybe 6 hours ago, who knew, it had said 1.8. The canyon was stretching, or contracting, or rearranging itself based on rules I couldn't begin to understand. Behind me, I heard something that wasn't quite sound, more like a pressure change, a bass note too low to hear but strong enough to feel in my chest cavity. And the void where Phantom Ranch had been was getting bigger, spreading up the canyon walls like a stain, erasing rock that had stood for 1.7 billion years. I started running and tried not to think about what Marie would say about my choices. I found Julie Ramirez at mile marker 2.7, which should have been impossible because there was no mile marker 2.7 on the Bright Angel Trail. The markers went 3.0, then 1.5, then 0.0 at the river, not 2.7. But there it was, green sign on a post, bold white numbers, 2.7. Julie was sitting beside it, staring at her hands. Both of them were aging. The left one looked normal. The right one looked like my grandmother's, spotted and papery with prominent veins and joints swollen from arthritis that couldn't have developed in the past few hours. Ethan? She looked up at me, and her eyes were bloodshot. Not from crying, from something else. The vessels had burst in intricate patterns, making her eyes look like stained glass. How long have I been sitting here? I don't know. How long does it feel like? 3 days. I've been sitting here for 3 days watching people walk past. Except they're walking backwards sometimes. And sometimes they're on fire but not burning. And sometimes, she held up her aging hand. This started yesterday, or 5 minutes ago. Time feels like taffy down here, Ethan. It stretches when you're not looking. I checked her vitals. Pulse erratic. Fast, then slow, then fast again, like her heart couldn't decide what rhythm to follow. Temperature fluctuating between 96 and 104 with each breath. Blood pressure impossible to read because it changed every second. We need to get you out of here. I tried. I walked up the trail for an hour and ended up further down. The canyon doesn't want us to leave, Ethan. It's curious. About us. I can feel it watching. I helped her stand, and her right leg almost gave out. The knee joint had stiffened like she had decades of arthritis, while her left leg was fine. She was aging asymmetrically, different parts of her body moving through time at different rates. How many others are still down here? I asked. I've seen maybe 30 people go past. Some going up, some going down. Some sideways through the rock, which shouldn't be possible, but I watched it happen. A man walked directly into the canyon wall and kept walking, like the stone was water. I could see him moving inside it, getting dimmer and dimmer until he disappeared. We started up the trail together, Julie leaning heavily on me, her aging leg dragging. Every 100 yards or so, we'd pass another marker. 2.4 miles, then 3.9, then 1.1, then 5.3. The distances made no sense, followed no pattern I could identify. At marker 4.2, which absolutely did not exist on any map, we found Becky and Mr. Hart. They'd made it maybe a quarter mile from where I'd left them, and they were both transforming. Becky's burned feet had healed. Not scarred over, healed completely, the skin pink and new like a baby's. But her arms were turning to stone, the same reddish-brown as the Navajo sandstone, spreading from her fingers toward her shoulders. She was scratching at the stone patches, trying to peel them off, but they were solid. When she tapped her knuckles against a rock, it made a hollow clicking sound. Stone on stone. Her husband's aged face had progressed. Now his entire head looked ancient, skin like dried leather, but his body was still normal. He was trying to help Becky pick at the stone on her arms, and I could see his aged fingers were brittle, cracking at the joints. "We tried to go up," Mr. Hart said. His voice sounded old too, creaky and thin. "But every time we climb, we end up lower. The trail is eating us." "It's not the trail," Julie said quietly. "It's what's under the trail. It's aware of us, studying us. I think we're the first living things it's encountered in a very long time." I wanted to tell her that was impossible, that geological formations don't study people, that she was experiencing some kind of trauma-induced delusion. But I'd seen the void where Phantom Ranch used to be. I'd felt that pulse in the rock. I'd watched time stretch and compress like taffy. Marie used to tell me that doctors make the worst patients because they can't accept that some things don't have explanations. That sometimes you just have to acknowledge that the human body does impossible things and medicine is just educated guessing with a Latin vocabulary. Maybe the canyon was the same. Maybe some things were older than explanation. My radio crackled. "Mr. Cole, this is Colonel Vance. We're reading severe spatial distortions in your area. Can you confirm? Trail markers are appearing that don't exist on any map. Distance measurements are meaningless. Time is..." I looked at Julie's aging hand, at Becky's stone arms. "Time is optional down here. We're advancing the timeline. Ordnance deployment in 90 minutes. You need to be above the rim by then." 90 minutes. I looked at our group, me, Julie with her aging leg, Becky turning to stone, Mr. Hart with his brittle ancient fingers. We were maybe 3 miles from the rim by the trail markers, but the trail markers were lying. We could be 5 miles away. We could be 10. We could be negative miles, moving backward through space every time we thought we were climbing. What happens if we're not out? The ordnance will create a controlled collapse of the canyon walls in a 2-mile radius around the epicenter. The entity will be buried under approximately 600 million tons of rock. Anything in that radius will be buried with it. 600 million tons. The math was simple: run fast enough to outrace a canyon collapse, or become part of the Vishnu basement rock for the next billion years. Except running was impossible when distance itself was broken. "Colonel, I need to know what we're running from. What is this thing?" "We don't know." "Your best guess." Long silence. Then, something that predates multicellular life. Something that went dormant when the canyon was still shallow sea. Something that remembers when Earth was a different planet entirely. And it's very, very large. I looked down the trail, toward the expanding void, and I thought I saw something in the darkness there. Not a shape implied dimensionality, and this was something else. Presence. An awareness that made my eyes hurt and my brain try to shut down rather than process what it was perceiving. It was looking back at me. And it was curious. We climbed for what felt like hours but was probably minutes or days or some number that didn't exist in normal time. Julie's right leg was completely arthritic now, the knee frozen, foot dragging. Becky's arms were solid stone up to her shoulders, useless weight she carried like a grotesque sculpture of herself. Mr. Hart's entire head had become ancient, his eyes milky with cataracts that had formed in minutes, his hearing almost gone. And the canyon kept rearranging itself. Switchbacks appeared where they hadn't been. Trail markers moved when we weren't looking. Once I turned around and saw the path behind us had become a sheer cliff face, like the trail had never existed. We were trapped on a narrow ledge that terminated in both directions, suspended in space with nowhere to go. Then I blinked and the trail was back. "It's playing with us," Julie said. Her voice was getting old too, taking on that quavering quality my grandmother had in her final year. "Like a cat with mice. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to understand us first." We passed another group of hikers, or the same group in a different time, I couldn't tell anymore. 5 people sitting in a circle, all of them screaming that oscillating wail, all of them staring at their hands as their fingers slowly merged together, flesh flowing like wax, individual digits becoming unified masses. I tried to help them, but when I touched one man's shoulder, my hand went numb. Not cold numb, but absent numb, like my hand had stopped existing for a moment. When the feeling came back, my fingers were rearranged. Not broken or injured, just in the wrong order. Thumb where my pinky should be, index finger where the thumb belonged, all wrong but functioning fine. I could still move them, could still grip things, They just weren't organized correctly anymore. "Don't touch anyone," I said to the others. "The effect is contagious, or infectious, or something." At marker 1.3, which was progress, maybe if the markers could be trusted, we found the source of the deepest pulse. Not Phantom Ranch, deeper. A crack in the canyon floor, maybe 15 feet wide, extending down into darkness that was too dark, too absolute. Light didn't reflect from it. It just stopped. The heat was coming from the crack, and the cold, and something else that my brain couldn't categorize as temperature. A sensation that was neither hot nor cold but made my skin crawl like insects were moving under it. And from the darkness, something was rising. Not climbing, not floating, rising like it was being extruded from the earth itself, slowly, inevitably. I couldn't see what it was. My eyes refused to focus on it, sliding off like trying to look at the sun. But I could see its effects. The rock around the crack was aging, visibly eroding, millions of years of weathering happening in seconds. Layers of sediment compressing and decompressing, colors shifting through the spectrum as mineral composition changed. And in the darkness, I saw eyes. Not eyes like humans have. These were holes in space, voids that looked back, apertures that opened onto something so old and vast that my consciousness tried to shut down rather than acknowledge it. Julie grabbed my arm. "Don't look directly at it. That's how it gets in. Through observation." She was right. The hikers who'd been staring down the trail, they'd been looking at this thing, and it had looked back. And that exchange of observation had changed them, infected them with its presence. My radio. "Mr. Cole, ordnance deployment in 15 minutes. Current thermal imaging shows you're still 2.7 miles from the rim. The markers say 1.3. Trust our instruments, not the markers. The canyon's spatial metrics are compromised. You have 15 minutes to cover 2.7 miles with injured personnel." The math was impossible. Even healthy, I couldn't sprint 2.7 miles up a 45-degree incline in 15 minutes. With Julie's frozen leg, with Becky's stone arms, with Mr. Hart nearly blind. We weren't getting out. "Colonel, we're not going to make it." "Then get as far as you can. The deeper you are when the collapse starts, the faster you'll die. That's the best I can offer you." I looked at my group. 3 people who'd trusted me to get them out. 3 people who were transforming into something else because I'd insisted on going down into this nightmare. Marie's voice in my head. "This is why you need to learn to let go, Ethan. You can't save everyone. Sometimes the math just doesn't work." But I'd never been good at accepting that. "There's another way," Julie said. She was staring at the canyon wall beside us. "Look." The wall was rippling again, that liquid stone texture, but this time I could see shapes moving through it. Handprints, footprints, the impressions of bodies moving through solid rock like it was water. "The man I saw walking through the wall," Julie said. "He didn't die. He went somewhere else. Through the rock. What if we could? That's insane. We're standing on top of something 1.7 billion years old that's erasing reality. Insane is relative." She limped toward the wall, her aging hand outstretched. "The entity is changing the rules. Why can't we use the new rules?" She pressed her palm against the sandstone, and her hand sank into it, not breaking through, sinking like the rock was accepting her. She pushed further, her arm disappearing up to the elbow, and when she pulled it back out, there was no hole, no opening. The rock was solid again. "It works," she said. "The stone is permeable. When you accept that it's possible." Becky stepped forward, her stone arms extended. When she touched the wall, her arms melted into it seamlessly, stone into stone, and I realized what was happening. The entity wasn't destroying us. It was trying to communicate, trying to show us that matter was more flexible than we thought, that physics was negotiable, that the universe operated by rules we hadn't evolved to perceive. We were bacteria suddenly aware of a human, trying to understand something operating on a scale we couldn't comprehend, with senses we didn't possess. Mr. Hart touched the wall with his ancient fingers, and they sank in like he was touching water. "It feels warm," he said, "welcoming, like going home." "No," I said, "we're not doing this. Walking into the rock means giving up, means letting this thing change us completely." "We're already changed," Julie said. She gestured to her aging body, to Becky's stone arms, to my rearranged fingers. "The question is whether we fight the change or work with it." My radio, 10 minutes, Mr. Cole. Ordnance is armed and ready. 10 minutes until 600 million tons of rock came down. 10 minutes to climb 2.7 miles or accept that we weren't getting out the traditional way. I looked at the wall, at the handprints moving through it like fish swimming through water, at the new rules this ancient thing was offering us. Then I looked at Becky Hart, at her husband with his ancient face, at Julie Ramirez who'd worked the canyon for 12 years and was aging decades with every breath. The math was clear. We could try to climb and die when the collapse came, or we could step through the wall into whatever existed on the other side. Neither option was good, but one was definite death, and the other was unknown. "If we do this," I said, "we might not come out the other side as ourselves." "I don't think we're ourselves anymore anyway," Julie said. She was probably right. I pressed my hand against the canyon wall, and it was warm and cool and neither, and my hand sank into the stone like it was greeting an old friend. Behind us, I heard the jets coming, the scream of engines echoing through the canyon, the whistle of ordnance falling. And I stepped through the wall into the stone, into somewhere else. The stone wasn't stone. It was time, compressed and solid. I could feel it passing around me, not through me, but around me, like I was standing in a river of centuries, millennia flowing past while I remained fixed, observing. I could see the canyon forming, not as memory or vision, but as direct experience. The Colorado River cutting its patient path, grain by grain, the rock peeling away in layers. I watched mountains rise and erode, watched the inland sea evaporate, watched the Vishnu schist metamorphose from seafloor sediment into the black rock at the canyon bottom. Watched something older than mountains wake up and notice that the little carbon-based things walking on the surface had finally developed enough complexity to be interesting. Julie was beside me or ahead of me or behind me. Direction didn't work right here. Her body was flickering between ages, child and adult and elderly and infant, all her possible moments existing simultaneously. But her eyes were steady, aware, human. "Do you feel it?" she asked. Her voice came from every direction and no direction. "It's not hostile. It's curious." I did feel it. The entity, the thing that had been dormant for longer than complex life, that remembered when Earth was molten rock and toxic atmosphere. It was studying us the way we might study bacteria under a microscope, not with malice, with interest. We were the first things it had encountered in billions of years that could observe it back. Becky and Mr. Hart were here too, their transformation stabilizing. Becky's stone arms had become something else, not flesh, not rock, but a third thing that functioned like both. Mr. Hart's aged face had stopped progressing, frozen at some point between his actual age and ancient. "Where are we?" I asked. "Inside the moment," Julie said. "Inside all the moments. The entity exists in geological time. It experiences a million years the way we experience a heartbeat. It's trying to show us how it perceives reality. Through the flowing time around us, I could see the canyon walls, but I could also see what was beyond them, the layers of earth extending down to a cavity that shouldn't exist. A space carved out billions of years ago by something that had been here before the continents formed, before the atmosphere became breathable, before anything we would recognize as life. And in that cavity, I saw the entity itself. Not its body, it didn't have a body in any sense I could understand. It was more like a geometry of consciousness, angles and dimensions that my brain couldn't process but tried to represent as shapes, as colors, as sensations that had no name. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was both and neither. And it was dying. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. The entity had been dormant for so long that the world had changed around it. The atmosphere it remembered was gone. The geology it understood had been replaced. It was waking into a planet that was no longer its home, and the act of waking was killing it. The heat, the time distortions, the reality breaks, those weren't attacks. They were symptoms. The entity was hemorrhaging its existence into our dimension, unable to properly manifest in a world that had evolved past its era. We were witnessing the death throes of something older than multicellular life. "It's trying to understand what happened," Becky said. Her voice was layered with echoes, like she was speaking from multiple moments at once. "It went to sleep in one world and woke up in another. It's confused, scared, maybe, if something that old can feel fear. Above us or outside us or around us, I felt the ordnance falling. Felt the jets releasing their payload, the bombs beginning their descent toward the canyon floor. 600 million tons of rock about to bury something that had existed since before rock formations had names. We have to go back," I said. "We have to stop them." "We can't go back," Julie said. "Not the way we were. The entity has changed us. We've seen too much, experienced too much. Our bodies exist in geological time now. If we step back into normal time, we'll—" She gestured at her flickering form, at the way she existed in multiple ages simultaneously. "We'll collapse. Our timeline will try to reconcile itself and fail." She was right. I could feel it. I existed in this moment, and also in the moment when Marie died, and also in the moment when I'd first become a medic, and also in every moment I'd spend in Death Valley next year thinking about the people I'd failed to save. My life was spread across time like sediment in a rock formation, and I couldn't compress it back into linear existence. "So what do we do?" Mr. Hart asked. "Stay here? Exist as whatever we've become? Or we go back anyway?" I said. "We collapse. We die. But we warn them first. Tell Colonel Vance that bombing this thing won't stop it. It'll just accelerate the hemorrhaging. The entity's death will take the canyon with it, maybe more. Maybe everything in a 100-mile radius as reality tries to reconcile what used to exist here with what exists now." Through the stone, I could see the south rim. Could see Colonel Vance and her team, see the bombers on their final approach, see the ordnance falling in slow motion from this perspective where time was negotiable. And I could see what would happen if those bombs hit. The entity wouldn't die cleanly. It would rupture, spilling its impossible existence across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The canyon would become a permanent wound in spacetime, a place where physics didn't work, where people who wandered in would emerge decades older or younger or not at all. The math was terrible. Let the entity die slowly, hemorrhaging, transforming everything in a 2-mile radius. Or kill it fast with ordnance, potentially expanding that radius to 100 miles. Or find a third option that probably didn't exist. "What if we help it?" Becky said. "What if we, I don't know, ease its transition? We're part of it now, connected to it. Maybe we can guide it toward a death that doesn't take everything with it." "We're not trained for that," I said. "We don't know how to. How do you even euthanize something made of living geology?" "The same way you euthanize anything," Julie said. Her voice was sad, knowing. "You acknowledge its suffering. You stay with it. You let it know it's not alone." Marie's voice, not in my head but in my memory, woven into the temporal sediment I'd become. "Sometimes the best medicine is just being present. You can't fix everything, Ethan. Sometimes you just witness." She'd said that about her cancer. about how she'd made peace with dying before I had, how she tried to teach me that some equations don't solve, some problems don't have answers, and the role of a healer is sometimes just to acknowledge the pain and stay present with it. I'd failed to learn that lesson with her. Maybe I could learn it now. Okay, I said, we help it die, but we do it before those bombs hit. I tried to estimate time from this perspective where time was meaningless. Maybe 5 minutes in normal time, maybe less. We moved deeper into the stone, toward the entity's core consciousness. It was like swimming through history, every step taking us back through millions of years. I saw the canyon when it was shallow, when it was deeper, when it didn't exist yet. Saw the entity in its prime, vast and content, dreaming its geological dreams. Saw the moment it had chosen to sleep, pulling itself down into the deep earth, waiting for what? A change in the atmosphere? A shift in the planet's magnetic field? Some condition that would signal the right time to wake. But that time had never come. The world had moved on without it. We reached the center, where the entity's awareness was most concentrated, and I could feel its confusion radiating out in waves. It didn't understand where the forests had come from, why the air was full of oxygen, why these small, fast-moving carbon things were crawling all over what used to be its territory. It was trying to study us, trying to learn, but it was dying too fast. The hemorrhaging was accelerating. "We're here," Julie said, speaking to the entity directly somehow. "We see you. We understand what you are." Did we? Could we? How do you understand something that existed before understanding itself evolved? But the entity responded. Not with words, it didn't have language, but with a shift in the temporal flow around us. A sensation that might have been gratitude or recognition, or just acknowledgement that it wasn't alone in its dying. Becky pressed her stone hands against what might have been the entity's equivalent of skin, of boundary, of self. "You've been here so long," she said, "since before anything. You don't have to be afraid." Mr. Hart, with his ancient face, added his voice. "Ending isn't failure. We all end. Everything ends. Even continents. Even stars." And I said what I should have said to Marie, what I'd been too afraid to say because it meant accepting that medicine had limits, that love had limits, that some things couldn't be saved no matter how hard you fought. "You can let go. We'll remember you were here." The entity's presence shifted. The hemorrhaging slowed, then stopped. Not because it was healing, it was still dying, but because it had stopped fighting the process. It was accepting. The time distortions began to fade. The heat anomalies stabilized. The reality breaks sealed themselves as the entity carefully, deliberately, pulled its existence back from our dimension. It was choosing how to die, choosing to go gently instead of rupturing. Above us, the ordnance was still falling, but we had time now. Time to... The world lurched. Reality snapped back like a rubber band, and suddenly I was standing on the bright angel trail, Julie and the hearts beside me, all of us solid and real and existing in normal linear time again. Julie's leg was still frozen. Becky's arms were still stone. Mr. Hart's face was still ancient. My fingers were still rearranged. We were changed permanently by what we'd experienced. But we were alive. We were human. We were here. My radio crackled. "Mr. Cole, ordnance impact in 30 seconds. If you can hear this, get down and cover your..." "Colonel, abort. Abort the strike." "What? We're past abort point. The ordnance is..." "The entity is dying on its own. Controlled death. If you bomb it now, you'll disrupt the process and cause the exact catastrophe you're trying to prevent." Silence. Then, "You're asking me to trust that something 1.7 billion years old is committing suicide? I'm asking you to trust that I was just inside that thing's consciousness and it's choosing to die peacefully rather than take everything with it." More silence. I could hear arguing in the background, someone yelling about mission parameters and another voice saying something about unprecedented biological data. Then, airstrike aborted. Ordnance redirected to impact in unpopulated zone. Mr. Cole, this better be the right call. It was, or it wasn't, but it was the only call that acknowledged the entity as something other than a threat to be eliminated. We climbed the rest of the way out in silence. The trail was stable now, the markers in their proper places, the distances behaving according to normal physics. The temperature dropped as we ascended, following the natural gradient. Behind us, the entity died slowly, withdrawing from our dimension layer by layer, pulling its existence back into whatever deep cavity it had emerged from. The void where Phantom Ranch had been began to fill in, not with new matter, but with the return of matter that had been temporarily displaced. By the time we reached the south rim, Phantom Ranch was back. Empty, but structurally intact, like it had never left. The people who'd been there, the 200 tourists and staff, they were back too, but changed. Some had aged. Some had parts of their bodies turned to stone. Some experienced time in loops, living the same hour over and over. Some had died, their bodies integrated into the canyon walls, becoming part of the geology. The official count was 73 dead, 127 permanently altered, and 0 explanations that satisfied anyone. Colonel Vance met me at the rim. She looked tired, like she'd aged 10 years in 6 hours. Maybe she had. Time had been weird for everyone. "You were inside it," she said. Not a question. "Yeah." "What was it?" "Old, confused, dying, trying to understand what happened to its world." "And you helped it die?" "I witnessed it dying. There's a difference." She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "The Park Service wants to give you a medal. I told them you'd probably refuse it." She was right. What happened in the canyon wasn't heroism. It was just being present, acknowledging suffering, staying with something while it died. Marie would have understood. They closed the canyon for 3 months, brought in scientists from a dozen agencies whose acronyms I'd never heard of, studied the geology, the time anomalies, the people who'd been changed. They never found a complete explanation. How do you explain something that existed before explanation itself evolved? I transferred to Death Valley like I'd planned. Took my rearranged fingers and my memories of standing inside geological time and moved to a place where the heat was just heat, where physics followed rules I could understand. Julie retired, said she'd experienced enough lifetimes for one career, since she'd lived through centuries in the span of hours. Her frozen leg never healed. Doctor said the cartilage in that knee had aged 80 years while the rest of her stayed normal. The heart's divorced, I heard. Hard to maintain a marriage when one of you has stone arms and the other has an ancient face. They still send each other birthday cards though. Some connections survive transformation. Sometimes I dream about the entity, about standing inside that vast awareness while it slowly, carefully chose how to die. About giving it what Marie had asked from me and I'd been too afraid to provide, permission to let go. I still don't know if I made the right choice, but I know it was the only human one.